Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring mental health and well-being,
Okay.
and we're diving into this super interesting conversation between two young adults on their podcast.
Cool.
It was really fascinating to see how they approach this whole idea of like prioritizing mental health, in our crazy busy world.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's something that everyone struggles with, and
Absolutely.
it's so easy to let it fall by the wayside.
Totally. And what I loved about their conversation is that it went beyond, the typical like bubble bath and face mask kind of self-care.
Yeah,
They were talking about like really integrating these small but manageable habits into their everyday lives.
right.
So like things that you can actually do.
Yeah, practical stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like one of them mentioned this breathing technique called box breathing. Have you heard of that?
I have. Yeah.
Okay, so tell me if I'm getting this right.
Okay.
You inhale for a count of 4, you hold your breath for 4, you exhale for 4, and then you hold again for 4.
That's it. Exactly.
And they're saying it's basically like a mini meditation you can do anywhere, anytime.
And the cool thing is it's backed by science. Like, even those short bursts of focused breathing can have a real impact on your nervous system.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It helps regulate your stress hormones.
So it's like training your brain to stay calm.
Exactly, like building mental muscle memory for chill.
I love that. Mental muscle memory for chill. Okay, I'm so trying that one.
You should. They also talk about setting reminders to take breaks throughout the day, which I think is so important.
Oh my gosh, yes. I get so sucked into work that I'll literally sit at my desk for hours without getting up.
It's so easy to do.
It is, but they were saying that even just stepping away for a few minutes, like to stretch or grab water, can actually boost your productivity.
It sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. Our brains aren't designed for that kind of constant, intense focus.
Right, it's like you got to give your brain a chance to reset.
Exactly, a little mental refresh.
I like that. So little habits, huge impact, but they also got into something that I think is even more important.
Oh,
Talking openly about mental health, they were really passionate about like breaking down the stigma.
which is so important because the reality is mental health challenges are incredibly common.
They are. Did you know that the World Health Organization says 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health issue at some point in their lives?
It's a huge number, and yet we still treat it like a secret.
Totally. And they were talking about how isolating that silence can be. Like you have to pretend everything's fine even when it's not.
Yeah, it puts so much pressure on people to keep up appearances.
And they made the really great point about how sharing our experiences can help normalize mental health challenges.
It's like giving others permission to do the same.
Exactly. And hopefully it encourages more people to reach out for help when they need it.
That's the goal, right? To create a more open and supportive environment where people feel comfortable talking about their struggles.
Absolutely. And speaking of help, they had some really interesting perspectives on therapy.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, instead of seeing it as this last resort or a sign of weakness, they were talking about it as a proactive tool for personal growth,
I like that.
right? One of them actually compared it to having a personal trainer for your mind.
That's a great analogy because it's not just about fixing problems, it's about building strength and resilience.
Totally. And they weren't just talking about traditional talk therapy either.
Right, there's so many different approaches now.
They mentioned art therapy, music therapy, even online therapy.
It's about finding what works best for you.
Exactly. Like one of them was saying how art therapy helped them process some difficult emotions that they couldn't really express through words alone.
That makes sense. It's like a different way of accessing and processing your inner world.
Yeah, and it highlights the importance of, being open to trying different approaches until you find one that really clicks.
Like finding the right key to unlock your potential for healing.
Exactly. So we've got small habits, open communication, and this whole idea of therapy as a tool for growth. But they also went deeper into this concept that often gets overlooked.
And was that?
Self-compassion.
Okay.
They were talking about treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding you would offer a friend.
That's so important.
Right. And they literally said, and I quote, "It's okay to have off days. You don't have to be perfect."
It's like giving yourself permission to be human.
Totally. And I think that's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive because they didn't shy away from talking about the tough stuff. They got real about how to support yourself when you're really struggling.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Let's dive in. It's not always pretty, right?
Not always, but they didn't sugarcoat it. They talked about those times when you're like really in the thick of it, feeling overwhelmed, anxious, just like,
Yeah, those days when it's hard to even get out of bed.
Exactly. And they shared some really practical tips for navigating those rough patches.
Like what kind of things?
Well, one thing they emphasized was the power of simple acts of kindness towards yourself.
Boy, I hate that.
Yeah, like literally scheduling time for things that bring you joy, even if it's just for like 15 minutes.
Okay, so, like, what kind of things?
Like taking a walk in nature, listening to your favorite music, or curling up with a good book,
It's like giving yourself permission to just be,
Totally. And to actually enjoy those things instead of just rushing through them.
right, to really savor them.
Exactly. They talked about how those little moments can actually shift your whole perspective.
It's like hitting the reset button on your mood.
Yeah, instead of focusing on everything that's going wrong, you're intentionally choosing to focus on something that makes you feel good.
I love that.
They also talked about leaning on their support networks when they're struggling.
Which is so important. We can't always do it alone.
Totally. And one of them mentioned having like a code word with their best friend.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so they could signal when they needed extra support without having to like explain everything.
That's such a smart idea, especially when you're feeling really drained and it's hard to articulate what you need.
Right, it's like an instant shorthand for, hey, I'm not okay right now, but I need you.
I love that. And it reminds you that you have people you can turn to.
Exactly. And they also talked about, recognizing their own limits and not being afraid to ask for help when they need it.
Which can be so hard sometimes.
It can be, but they were talking about therapy as another form of support.
Like having a professional in your corner.
Right, exactly. Like having a neutral, non-judgmental space to process your feelings and develop coping strategies.
It's like having a coach for your mental health.
I like that. And it was interesting because they didn't present therapy as this like scary or intimidating thing.
Right. It was more like just another tool in their self-care arsenal.
Exactly. Like, hey, if I need extra support, I'm going to reach out to a professional just like I would see a doctor if I had a physical health issue.
That's a really healthy way to frame it.
Totally. And they also talked about being proactive about their mental health.
Okay, so what did that look like for them?
Well, they talked about having a mental health toolkit,
The toolkit, I like that.
right? Like a set of strategies they could use when they felt themselves starting to spiral.
So like a mental first aid kit.
Yeah, exactly. And they shared some really cool ideas.
Like what?
Well, one of them keeps a journal where they write down their thoughts and feelings when they're feeling stressed or anxious.
Journaling could be so helpful for processing emotions.
Right. It's like getting those thoughts out of your head and onto paper so they don't feel so overwhelming.
It's like creating a space to unpack all that stuff.
They also talked about having a go-to playlist of uplifting music that they listen to when they need a mood boost.
Oh, I love that. Music can be so powerful.
It really can. And they even talked about having a list of positive affirmations that they repeat to themselves when they're feeling down.
Affirmations. Like what kind of things?
Things like, I am strong, I am capable, I am worthy of love and happiness.
It's like rewiring your brain for positivity.
Totally. And they said it helps them shift their mindset and focus on their strengths instead of their weaknesses.
I love that. So it's like they've built this whole ecosystem of support for themselves.
Right. Drawing on different tools and strategies depending on what they need in the moment.
And recognizing that sometimes you need more than just self-care. You might need to reach out for professional help.
Exactly. And they talk about mental health being a journey, not a destination. Like it's not about achieving this perfect state of always happy, but rather about developing the tools and resilience to navigate the ups and downs of life.
So true. It's an ongoing process.
And sometimes that means asking for help, trying new things, and being patient with yourself when progress feels slow.
Absolutely. And remembering that there's no shame in needing support.
Exactly. In fact, they said that reaching out for help is actually a sign of strength.
I love that because it takes courage to acknowledge your struggles and seek support.
Totally. And they ended their conversation with a quote that really stuck with me.
What was it?
They said mental health is a marathon, not a sprint.
Oh, I like that. It's a good reminder to pace yourself
Right, and to focus on sustainable practices.
and to celebrate those small victories along the way.
Exactly. So we've explored their practical tips, their emphasis on self-compassion, and their insights on building resilience.
It's amazing how much wisdom they packed into that conversation.
I know, right? But what really struck me was their approach to creating a personalized mental health toolkit.
Yeah, I love that.
And they've given us so many practical and actionable strategies to draw on.
It's like a menu of options for taking care of your mental well-being.
Right. And it's inspiring to see how they've integrated these practices into their everyday lives.
Not as a chore, but as a way to empower themselves.
Exactly. It's like they've given us permission to be proactive about our mental health and to experiment with different tools and strategies until we find what works best for us.
That's a really powerful message.
It is. But before we wrap up, I have one final thought that wasn't explicitly mentioned in their conversation, but it kept coming up for me as we were unpacking their insights.
Oh, I'm curious. Tell me out.
It's like, all their talk about connecting with others for support, but also all that stuff about connecting with themselves through those little habits and therapy and even self-compassion.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's like all those different strategies are all about like Getting to know yourself better.
Right. And feeling more connected to who you are at your core.
Exactly. Like you're building a stronger sense of self.
And I think that's something we don't always talk about when it comes to mental health.
Right. It's not just about like fixing what's broken.
It's also about like nurturing and strengthening that connection with yourself.
So it's like both inner and outer work.
Exactly. And I think that inner connection can come from so many different plays. Like for some people, it might be through mindfulness practices.
Hmm.
For others, it might be through being creative or spending time in nature or, connecting with their spirituality.
Yeah, it's about finding what resonates with you.
Exactly. And it made me think about how much they taught about being present in their daily
Right,
lives.
like you're really savoring those little moments.
Yeah, like enjoying a cup of coffee or listening to the birds singing or just taking a few deep breaths.
It's so easy to just rush through life and miss those little things.
It is, but they were saying that those moments of presence are where we truly connect with ourselves.
And find a sense of peace in the midst of all the chaos.
Right, so it's not about adding more things to your to-do list.
It's more about shifting your perspective
Yeah, like bringing more awareness to the present moment.
and finding those little pockets of joy and connection throughout your day.
Exactly. So we've talked about their practical tips, or emphasis on self-compassion, and all their insights on building resilience.
It's been such a rich conversation.
It really has, but this theme of connection keeps coming back to me.
It's like the underlying current.
Right. It's like they're saying that mental well-being isn't just about what you do. It's about how you connect.
With yourself, with others, with the world around you.
Exactly. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you with this question.
Okay.
What helps you feel more connected to yourself and to those around you?
That's a good one.
What brings you joy? What makes you feel grounded and alive? How can you incorporate more of those things into your daily life, even in small ways?
Such great questions to reflect on.
And remember, taking care of your mental well-being is an ongoing journey. It's not a destination.
Right, there's no finish line.
So be patient with yourself, celebrate those small victories, and never hesitate to reach out for support when you need it.
And remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into mental health and well-being.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, take care of yourselves.